Hello, my friends, and welcome. Before we settle in for tonight's story, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here. These bedtime tales are made to bring you comfort, stir your memories, and carry you gently into the night. If you enjoy these moments we share together, your support means the world. Please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. I'd also love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city, your state, or even your country. It's always special to see how far these stories travel and to feel the connection between all of us. Your comments, likes, and shares help keep this channel alive and growing so we can bring you even more tales that warm the heart and calm the mind. Now let's get comfortable, take a deep breath, and step together into tonight's story. It was one of those quiet evenings where the sky hangs low and the air smells faintly of pine and summer's end. I sat on the old wooden porch of my house, the one I helped build decades ago, sipping a cup of warm tea. The creak of the rocking chair beneath me was familiar, comforting. My eyes wandered to an old magazine resting on the table. A feature about vintage trucks caught my attention. One photograph pulled me in, a weathered Ford pickup, its paint chipped but proud, shining softly in the golden light of a sunset. It was a reminder, a gentle nudge of days when I was younger, hands rough from sawdust and nails, heart full of dreams and determination. Suddenly, memories came rushing back, like a river breaking through a dam. I could smell the sawdust in the workshop, hear the echo of hammer strikes against wood, feel the weight of the toolbox on my shoulder. It was the life I'd carved out, piece by piece, plank by plank. I leaned back, letting those memories wash over me. The years I spent learning the craft, the long hours on job sites, the smell of fresh-cut timber mingling with morning dew, the friendships forged in shared labor, the quiet moments of triumph when a frame stood tall and true, the love that kept me steady through the storms, both in weather and in life. Tonight, I invite you to walk with me through those years, the joys, the struggles, the unexpected twists, to see the world through the eyes of a carpenter who lived a life built on hard work, deep care, and simple pride. This is my story, and it begins here. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the sound of hammers and saws was as common as bird song. My father was a carpenter, like his father before him, and from the moment I could hold a hammer, I was drawn to the rhythm of building. I remember sitting on the wooden steps of our porch, watching him shape boards with such ease and respect, as if the wood itself was alive. By the time I was 10, I had my first little toolbox, given to me for my birthday. It wasn't much, just a hammer, a measuring tape, and a worn-out screwdriver. But to me, it was treasure. I would sneak into the workshop after school, pretending to build secret projects, even if sometimes it was just a crooked birdhouse or a shaky stool. The smell of freshly cut pine became the scent of home. Sawdust would stick to my skin and my hands quickly grew calloused, but I never minded. I wanted to be like Dad, to learn his skill and his patience. Those afternoons felt endless, filled with the promise of creating something real and lasting. School wasn't always easy. I wasn't the best at algebra or spelling, but I excelled at shop class, where numbers and letters became measurements and angles. I found joy in building, in the transformation of rough wood into something purposeful. That was my language, the one I spoke best.
Looking back, those early days shaped me. They rooted me in the simple but profound satisfaction of honest work. And though life would take me down many unexpected roads, I carried that spark with me, always ready to shape the next plank, the next chapter. When I turned 16, I left school early to apprentice under Mr. Jenkins, the town's most respected carpenter. His workshop was a world of its own, a maze of lumber stacks, buzzing saws, and walls lined with tools older than me. The smell of varnish and sawdust was thick in the air, and every surface bore the marks of 100 projects. Mr. Jenkins didn't waste time. On my first day, he handed me a chisel and said, "Watch your fingers and learn to listen to the wood." Those words stuck with me. I spent long days sanding, measuring, carrying heavy planks, and learning the subtle art of precision. Every splinter and bruise was a lesson, every mistake a step toward mastery. The work was tough, dawn to dusk hours, aching muscles, and a relentless pursuit of perfection. But there was a rhythm to it, a steady beat that grounded me. We built porches, barns, and the occasional church pew, each project a testament to patience and skill. The pride of seeing a structure stand tall and true made every ache worthwhile. Friendships grew amidst the hammering and laughter. We'd share stories over greasy lunches and joke about the times we nearly lost a finger. Life was simple, but full. Evenings were spent dreaming of the future, wondering where this path might lead. I didn't know then that the wood I shaped would also carve the man I'd become. But I felt it, deep in my bones, the promise of a craft that was as much about heart as it was about hands. The years that followed were a blur of sawdust and sweat, of early mornings and long drives to job sites scattered across the countryside. As I grew into my 20s, I wasn't just an apprentice anymore. I was trusted with blueprints, given my own projects to manage. The transition wasn't always easy. With responsibility came pressure, and sometimes doubts crept in. Was I good enough? Could I meet the expectations of clients who paid hard-earned money for my work? But those doubts were always drowned out by the tangible satisfaction of creation. There was nothing quite like standing back after a day's labor to admire the frame of a new home rising from the ground, the smell of fresh-cut wood mixing with earth and sweat. Every nail hammered in was a step toward something bigger, a family's shelter, a community's landmark, a legacy. I remember one summer when we were hired to rebuild the porch of the old Miller house, a sprawling Victorian with creaky floors and stories trapped in its peeling paint. That job wasn't just about wood and nails, it was about preserving history. I worked alongside a crew of men who treated that house like a living thing. We peeled back decades, layer by layer, careful not to erase the past, but to give it new life. It was hard, exhausting work, but I felt proud, like we were part of something greater than ourselves. Outside of work, life had its own surprises. I met Margaret at a town dance one autumn evening. She had a laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, and a spirit that matched my own stubbornness. We married the following spring, and soon after, our home filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the patter of tiny feet. Balancing family and work was a challenge. There were nights I came home with aching muscles and a mind still racing over a tricky joint or a missing measurement. But Margaret was my anchor, reminding me what mattered most. She understood the demands of my craft, the pride I took in it, and never once asked me to give it up.
As the years rolled on, technology crept into the trade. Power tools replaced hand saws, new materials changed the way we built. I was skeptical at first, nostalgic for the feel of a hand plane smoothing a board, the steady rhythm of a hammer striking nails. But I learned to adapt, knowing that to stay relevant meant embracing change without losing the soul of the work. Sometimes I'd catch myself watching younger carpenters with their cordless drills and digital levels, marveling at how the craft evolved, but also hoping the art of careful, patient building didn't get lost. Through it all, my hands remained my connection to the wood, to the work, to the life I'd built. And as I moved closer to retirement, the weight of those years settled in my bones like the warm embrace of a well-worn glove, reminding me of a lifetime shaped by honest labor, love, and resilience. By the time I reached my 40s, the workshop wasn't just a place to work. It was a second home. The walls, lined with decades of tools and memories, seemed to breathe with the stories of every project I'd touched. The grain of the wood, the smell of varnish, the subtle creak of floorboards. These were the textures of my life. Work had become more than a job. It was a calling. Each project carried its own weight, not just in pounds or dollars, but in meaning. I still remember the day we built the community center in our town, a place where kids learned to dance, seniors gathered for potlucks, and neighbors shared stories. We worked through rain and heat, sweat stinging our eyes, hands blistered but steady. When the final beam was lifted into place, I felt a quiet pride that still lingers when I drive past that building. Friendships forged in those moments were as solid as oak. There was Frank, who'd been my right hand for years, with a laugh that could fill a room and a heart as big as the lumber piles we stacked. Then there was young Eddie, who reminded me of myself when I started, hungry, restless, eager to prove he belonged. Teaching him wasn't always easy. He made mistakes, sure, but with patience, he grew into a craftsman who cared as much about the soul of a building as the strength of its frame. At home, life was full, but not always simple. The kids were growing fast, Emily with her sharp wit and endless curiosity, and little Tom, who followed me around the yard pretending to carry a hammer twice his size. Margaret worked hard too, managing the household with a grace that held us all together. We shared quiet dinners after long days, the smell of pine and sawdust lingering in my clothes, mingling with the aroma of her cooking. Loss came too. Friends moved away, seasons changed, and the years took their toll. I lost my father just before I turned 50, a man whose hands had built not just houses, but the foundation of who I was. The day of his funeral, I stood beside his coffin, gripping a piece of his old woodworking apron, feeling the weight of legacy and the fleeting nature of time. Still, through joy and sorrow, the craft remained my anchor. It taught me patience when the world rushed by, taught me to build carefully, to measure twice and cut once, lessons that stretched far beyond the workshop. I often found myself reflecting on what it meant to create, not just structures, but moments, memories, lives shaped by steady hands and unwavering care. And in those reflections, I understood the true meaning of my work. It was never just about wood and nails, but about building a life worth remembering. In my early 50s, life brought a new kind of change, one that wasn't measured in inches or angles, but in miles and memories. The company I worked for was expanding, and with that came opportunities to work on projects far from home. We traveled to neighboring states, building everything from cozy cabins in the mountains to sleek suburban homes in growing towns. At first, the constant movement unsettled me. I was used to familiar faces and routines, the local diner where the waitresses knew my name, the quiet rhythm of small-town life. But there was something exhilarating about each new site, the chance to build from scratch in unfamiliar places, to leave a mark on a landscape I hadn't known before.
The smell of pine forests gave way to the scent of fresh-cut cypress in Louisiana. The hum of cicadas replaced the distant whistle of trains I'd grown up with. Each job site had its own character, its own challenges. Sweltering summer days under the southern sun, sudden afternoon storms that soaked through tarps and boots. Away from home, I learned new ways to adapt. The tools were changing too.
Cordless drills replaced plug-ins. Power sanders took the place of worn hand planes. Technology crept in, and I tried not to resist. The craft was evolving, and I needed to evolve with it. Margaret and the kids missed me, and I missed them fiercely. Phone calls late at night, postcards from faraway places. They kept us connected. When I came home, the familiar creak of the porch and the smell of her cooking wrapped around me like a warm blanket. One particular project stayed with me, a restoration of a historic lighthouse on the rugged coast. The work was painstaking, with weather-beaten wood that threatened to crumble under the slightest touch. We replaced beams, rebuilt stairs, and restored windows with panes thick from years of storms. Standing at the top, watching the waves crash below, I felt the weight of history and the importance of preserving something enduring. Those years taught me more than how to build in new places. They taught me about roots and wings, about the balance between holding on and letting go, about the spaces we carry inside us, even when we roam. And through it all, the steady beat of hammer on nail, the scent of sawdust and wood glue, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, those remained my constants. By the time I reached my late 50s, the years had settled into my bones like layers of varnish on weathered wood, each one adding a little more character, but also a little more fragility. The aches in my back became reminders of every heavy beam lifted, every awkward angle wrestled into place. The days of working sunrise to sunset without a second thought were behind me. Margaret and I had faced challenges too. Health scares, quiet arguments born from exhaustion, the bittersweet reality of watching our children step into the world, sometimes away from home. There were nights I'd lie awake on the porch, the cool air wrapping around me, wondering if I had done enough, if the life I built was solid enough to withstand the storms. Work began to change as well. I shifted from the heavy labor to more mentoring, passing on what I knew to younger men and women eager to learn. Watching them grow gave me a new kind of joy, a sense that my years of sweat and patience had a purpose beyond my own hands. But beneath it all, there was a quiet fear of being forgotten, of becoming irrelevant in a world that moved faster, embraced technology quicker, and sometimes seemed to overlook the value of craftsmanship and experience. Yet love remained my anchor. Margaret's steady presence, her laughter echoing through the rooms we shared, and the small moments, the way she held my hand during difficult days, how our children and grandchildren brought life and light into the house, reminded me what truly mattered. In those moments, I found peace, a deep understanding that life, like wood, has its knots and cracks, but with care and patience, it can still hold strong. And so, with calloused hands and a heart full of memories, I continued to build, not just houses, but a legacy of love, resilience, and quiet strength. In my early 60s, I found myself working on what would become one of the most meaningful projects of my life, a community library in the heart of town. The old building had been neglected for years, but the town wanted to breathe new life into it. They needed someone who understood both the craft and the soul of a place, and somehow I was lucky enough to be that person. This project wasn't just about wood and nails. It was about preserving a space where stories lived, where generations would come to learn, dream, and grow. Each plank we restored felt like a connection to the past and a gift to the future. My hands were slower now, the aches more frequent, but I moved with a deliberate grace. I taught the younger carpenters to feel the wood, to respect its history, to build with care. We worked side by side, swapping stories as much as tools. The camaraderie warmed the chilly mornings and made the long days pass easier. At home, things were quieter. Margaret and I spent more evenings on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the soft glow reflecting in her eyes. The kids had grown, with families of their own, and the grandchildren filled the house with laughter and energy. Retirement was no longer a distant idea, but a looming reality. I wrestled with the thought of stepping away from the work that had defined me. What would I be without the hum of saws and the scent of fresh timber? Would the years of building still matter? Yet, as the library's doors finally opened and the community poured in, gratitude and pride swelled within me. I realized that my work wasn't just about the structures. It was about the lives those structures held and the memories they fostered. That last build was a gentle farewell and a new beginning, a moment to look back with gratitude and forward with hope. Retirement came quietly one crisp autumn morning. The shop was filled with familiar scents, pine shavings, varnish, and the lingering dust of countless projects. My coworkers, some old friends and some new faces I'd helped train, gathered around with warm smiles and heartfelt words. They presented me with a handcrafted wooden clock, its face etched with the dates marking my years of service. It was more than a gift. It was a symbol of time well spent, of years poured into something lasting, the kind of legacy that couldn't be measured in paychecks or awards, but in respect and love. That day, I stood on the porch of the shop one last time, breathing in the familiar air, the hum of the town settling into evening calm. I thought about the long roads traveled, the homes built, the friendships forged, and the family that had grown alongside me. Leaving the workshop felt like closing a chapter, but it was also opening the door to new rhythms, slower mornings, quiet afternoons, and time to savor the little moments. Margaret was by my side, her hand in mine, steady and warm as always. We had plans, trips to places we'd only dreamed of, visits to children and grandchildren scattered across the country. Most of all, I carried with me the knowledge that I had lived a life shaped by honest work and deep connection, that I had built more than houses. I had built a life worth remembering. Retirement settled over me gently, like a soft blanket on a cool evening. The mornings no longer began with the clang of tools or the scent of fresh-cut wood, but with the slow, comforting ritual of coffee on the porch. I watched the seasons change, the fiery reds of fall, the quiet hush of snow, the rebirth of spring, all from the same wooden chair I had carved myself so many years ago. I found joy in small things, tending the garden Margaret loved, fixing the creaky fence that kept our dogs in, and listening to the wind whisper through the trees. The world had slowed, but my mind often wandered back to those busy days on job sites, the feel of a well-used hammer, the smell of sawdust in the morning air. Family visits became the highlights of my weeks. The laughter of grandchildren echoing through the rooms brought a different kind of life to the house. I showed them how to handle tools safely, shared stories of my younger days, and watched with pride as they built their own little projects. Sometimes I caught myself tracing the lines of my hands, once strong and steady, but now marked by time, but still proud of every scar and callus. Those hands had built a lifetime of memories, and they still held the strength of a life well lived.
And though the days were quieter now, the heart of the carpenter still beat steady inside me, a reminder that the work, the love, and the legacy endure long after the last nail is driven. As I settled deeper into retirement, the quiet moments gave way to reflections, long, slow thoughts about what it all meant. I'd spent decades shaping wood and building homes, but more than that, I'd shaped a life rooted in purpose and connection. The rhythm of those years echoed in my mind like the steady thump of a hammer on a nail, sometimes slow, sometimes urgent, always deliberate. I thought often about my father and grandfather, who had handed down not just tools, but values, the dignity of honest work, the importance of patience, and the belief that what you build matters beyond its walls. Their hands, like mine, were maps of labor and love, scars and strength woven together. There were moments of doubt, too, times when the world felt like it was moving too fast, when technology seemed to blur the lines between craftsmanship and convenience. I worried that the soul of building, the care, the attention, the respect for material and moment, might be lost in the rush. Yet every time I felt that worry, I reminded myself of the people I taught, the apprentices who had taken up the mantle with their own passion. I saw in them the future of the craft, a new generation, learning old lessons, but adding their own touch. Family remained my center. Margaret's steady love was a balm, and watching our children and grandchildren grow into their own lives was a joy I never took for granted. Their laughter filled the house like sunlight, and their presence was a daily reminder that legacy is not just built with wood, but with love and memory. Sometimes, when the house was still and the night was deep, I would sit in my favorite chair, hands resting on the worn arms, and feel a quiet gratitude for the life I'd lived, for the work I'd done, for the stories etched in every beam and board. And I knew, no matter where time took me, that my story, like the homes I built, was strong enough to endure. Life, as it always does, threw some unexpected turns my way during these years. Health issues crept up, subtle at first. Aches that lingered longer than they should, days when the energy to pick up a hammer was just not there. It was a difficult adjustment. For a man whose identity had long been wrapped up in physical labor, slowing down felt like losing a piece of himself. There were times I wrestled with fear. The fear of becoming a burden, of fading into the background, of watching the world change while feeling left behind. Nights when the silence pressed too hard, and I questioned if all those years of hard work really meant anything in the grand scheme of things. But then, amid the doubt came moments of clarity, the gentle smile of Margaret, the eager eyes of grandchildren wanting to learn a simple knot or how to hold a nail straight. The letters and calls from apprentices I'd mentored, they reminded me that strength isn't only in the hands, but in the heart and mind. I found new ways to contribute, sharing stories and lessons, teaching from my chair what I once taught from job sites. The craft lived on in me, not just as muscle memory, but as wisdom passed down. Change was no longer the enemy. It was part of the journey. A different kind of building, this time of memories, relationships, and peace. And through it all, the core truth remained. A life well built is not measured by the speed of one's hands, but by the love and legacy left behind. The deeper I settled into the gentle rhythms of retirement, the more I came to understand that the most important structures we build aren't made of wood or nails. They are made of moments, relationships, and the quiet legacy we leave behind. Those tangible projects I poured my sweat into over decades now stood as silent witnesses to a lifetime of care. But it was the intangible that filled me with a profound sense of purpose. I spent many afternoons with my grandchildren, their small hands clumsy but eager, learning to measure and saw, to listen to the grain of wood like it was a secret waiting to be told. Watching them stumble, then succeed, brought a different kind of fulfillment than any house or porch ever had. In their eyes, I saw the future, a new generation ready to take what I built and carry it forward in their own way. I shared stories, too, tales of long days under the sun,
the camaraderie among coworkers, the smells and sounds that shaped my youth. They listened with wide eyes, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent, soaking in a world so different from theirs, but connected by the same human thread. Family gatherings became celebrations not just of birthdays or holidays, but of shared history. The walls echoed with laughter, with music, with memories woven through time. Margaret and I often sat quietly after the guests left, holding hands on the porch, knowing that our life together was a cornerstone in this story. Sometimes I caught myself reflecting on the fears that had shadowed my later years, the fear of being forgotten, of becoming irrelevant. But now, surrounded by family, friends, and the tangible fruits of my labor, I felt an overwhelming peace. My life had been built carefully, with patience and love, and that foundation would hold long after I was gone. The craft had taught me many things: precision, patience, resilience. But above all, it taught me how to build a life worth living. And that, I realized, was the greatest masterpiece of all. As the years gently folded into one another, I found a quiet joy in the slowing pace of life. The creak of my old rocking chair on the porch became a soothing rhythm, a steady heartbeat against a backdrop of a world that seemed to rush faster every day. The scent of pine and fresh-cut wood was now a memory, but the warmth it brought lingered deep in my soul. Margaret and I spent long evenings watching sunsets bleed colors across the sky, sharing stories from our youth and dreams of days past. Sometimes we sat in silence, simply grateful for the comfort of each other's presence. The house, once bustling with the footsteps of our children and grandchildren, now held a softer, quieter kind of life, one filled with memories etched into every corner. My hands, once rough and strong, had softened with time, though the stories they carried remained vivid. Each wrinkle, each scar was a chapter, a reminder of summers under blazing sun, winters spent in dim workshops, laughter shared over simple meals, and challenges overcome with steady resolve. I found peace in the knowledge that I had built more than structures. I had built trust, love, and a legacy that would endure. Though I sometimes felt the weight of loneliness, especially on nights when shadows stretched long, I also felt gratitude for a life rich in experience, for the family that surrounded me, and for the craft that had shaped my very being. The world outside changed, but inside the carpenter's spirit remained, steady, patient, and enduring. And as I watched the stars emerge one by one, I knew that my story, like the homes I built, was a testament to a life lived with purpose and heart. Now, as I sit here on this familiar porch, the evening breeze brushing against my weathered face, I feel a deep and steady gratitude. The sun dips low, casting long shadows over the land I helped shape, the houses I built, and the family that fills them with life and laughter. My hands rest gently on my knees, hands that once wielded hammers with strength and purpose, now softened by time but still proud. I think back to the boy who first held a hammer, wide-eyed and hopeful, dreaming of building something real. I think of the young man apprenticing under Mr. Jenkins, learning not just the craft, but the patience and care that make a true carpenter. I remember the father, the husband, the friend, the mentor, all roles that shaped and were shaped by the work of my hands. Life wasn't always easy. There were setbacks, losses, and fears that sometimes felt heavier than the beams I lifted. But through it all, I learned that the true measure of a life isn't in flawless perfection, but in resilience, love, and the legacy we leave behind. Tonight, as the stars blanket the sky and the world grows quiet, I am filled with peace. I am proud of the life I built, piece by piece, moment by moment, a life rooted in hard work, shaped by love, and carried forward by those I hold dear. And in that, I find my greatest joy. This is my story. Thank you for walking through it with me.